at the time when your motivation is high, you cannot believe that you would not feel motivated in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
But then it's gone, isn't it?
Been there right from the start of the Never Taught to Lift. Since I started, my first blog post was about a month before I attended your 2-day course, so Unraveling SSE for Therapists. I remember I didn't really know too much about it at the time, and I went really excited to learn all these coaching cues for the different exercises and how to really get started with the exercising mainly. And I was shocked in a good way that you focused pretty much that entire first day on psychology of goal setting, exercise adherence, how we adapt our approach before you'd even looked at any of the exercises. And while there are a few people who are disappointed, actually that quite excited me. And if I combine that with your talk today, where you talked about within the first 6 weeks of starting a new exercise, 70% adherence rate to that exercise within the first 6 weeks, which dropped dramatically to about 20% after 6 weeks in the longer term. And I just wanted to know why you focus so heavily right at the start on the psychology than the practical nature of doing the exercises first.
Yeah, it's a big question. And I suppose it kind of comes back to the way my approach is always to explore people first, to find out what their main goal is. And goals can even the word goal can sometimes be a bit, I prefer a want or a desire or a why they're going to do. What are they trying to get to? Are they trying to get to lifting their grandkids or fixing cars? I want that to be the real tangible thing. The pain is taken away from, or their weakness is taken away from them performing a task that they really enjoy doing. Because I think if you can establish what they really want at the beginning, like I was saying to you before, in those first few weeks, motivation is high, all right? And you're enthusiastic, like everybody in January, for example, the whole New Year's resolution idea. But what happens after that is it gets boring or dull, and it's hard work. So on those Tuesday nights, when it's raining, or you don't really want to do those exercises, you need something to be able to tell your brain that actually, I really want this thing. This maybe it might be traveling, maybe it might be lifting your grandkids or whatever it might be, but that is actually going to be more important to you, and the emotional part of your brain will go, actually, you know what, I want that. I don't want to just sit on the couch. This is more important to me. And it will allow you to stick to the exercises, commit to the exercises, which for strength training is so important. You're looking 3, 4, 5 months for that consistency, for things to show. So it's just, if you don't have that, the research will say is that you're going to stop doing the exercise and possibly fail in your goal.
So I suppose you see quite early gains initially, because your brain's effectively utilising the muscle strength you've already got and learning how to do that efficiently.
So you get those initial neurological changes, particularly around coordination. So your brain just kind of goes, oh, this is how you do that movement. You don't actually get any adaptation sometimes within the muscle unit itself. You get this, I know what to do now. It's a bit like throwing a dart. Eventually you start to, you do it repeatedly, you start to know how much the weight of that dart, etc. Mm-hmm. But where you get the real consistency and the strength changes is in the months going by. And that comes from that consistency. So if you don't get that, what happens around the 6-10 week mark is you stop making those really quick coordination developments or adaptations where you've learned, and then you get to a plateau phase where you don't see that same step change. It's not as big as before, and that can demotivate you as well. You're like, oh, that's it now. Whereas actually, if you stick consistently for another couple of months, you then get that next stage. And that's where people fall out again in that 6+ week where they're like, this isn't exciting anymore. I'm not seeing as many changes. Maybe this isn't working for me.
And I suppose that's the power of documenting the workouts you've done and the weights you've used. Because if you can look back over a 2-month period and see how much you've changed, you might not have felt it. It's a bit like watching a child grow up.
Yes.
Versus a distant relative that sees them once a year.
Yeah.
Is if you can look back at those bigger changes, that's going to guide your motivation forwards.
That reminds me of a thing I call improvement greed. So people come in at a certain level and you give them something to do, and they may, especially if someone hasn't strength trained before, they'll make massive changes really quickly, like we just said, right? So in those first few weeks, they get these improvements, but then they come back maybe 2 months later and they're a bit downhearted. They kind of sit down and they're a bit like, well, nothing's really changing. I'm not that much better than I was. And that's where, as you said, measurement is comes down to going, okay, well, let's have a look at you today. And then you bring up your numbers or your measurement from the beginning, and I usually display that on a whiteboard for them, and they're going to go, oh, right, because they're not to where their goal is yet, So they're greedy to get to that goal, which I like. It's improvement greed, it's a good greed. But it's so important to keep that, to give that feedback at that time to keep the consistency going, because you're not quite at that goal, which is why they're sad. But they still need to keep pushing until they get to that goal. And your job then as a coach is to try and say, look, we're nearly there and look how far you've come. Because some patients can't see that, exactly like the analogy you used. They just don't see those changes.
And we're going to come on to books later, but it reminds me of a great book that I've read called The Gap and the Gain.
Okay.
And it talks about if you always judge yourself on the goal you want to achieve, you'll always fall short, because the closer you get, the more the goal becomes. It's a bit like an explorer trying to find the horizon, is that you'll always feel like you're falling short, and it's just a negative. So sometimes you have to look back at where you've come from and see the progress you've made.
Absolutely. And that actually, if you look at habit research, that's one of the kind of common principles in good habit formation, is to celebrate the successes.
And one of the things I loved is these reminders of that ultimate goal that you want. And you had a picture on your phone, I think, as that was every time you looked at the phone, there's just a kind of that little drip feed of a reminder of this is the person I want to be like, or this is the goal I've got. And is there any other tips like that you have for anyone who just keeping that goal in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have got some good research. Gail Matthews is a researcher in California. Some of her research looks at even writing down goals, writing it down. There's about a 36% likelihood of achieving that goal. So it's not 100%, but you're going to write it down, aren't you? For 36%. If I give you 36 pounds or no pounds, you're going to take 36 pounds, aren't you? So you're going to be like, so you write it down. And again, the reason for that is it puts you in a place where you then have to process it. So simply as writing it down, commitment's actually increased as well. We've got some research around people who write things down, commit things longer. The biggest one is accountability though. So telling other people or having a coach or someone to support you, that is even high as 76%. If we can do that with our clients or people who come to see us and say, look, what's your commitment? Who not only me, but are you telling other people? Who are you accountable for this? What is that? Is accountability going to keep you on a Tuesday night when it's raining and you're tired and you don't want to do the thing? It's like, that's going to be one of the strongest predictors of you getting to that goal. And there's good evidence on that.
And I suppose another one is the counting streaks as well. So just from a personal note, I've done 24 weeks in a row of 3 runs a week, and it's the most consistent I've ever been. And I'm so scared of dropping a week now that I went out late last night for a run. I'll do one again this evening. And I think I'm also on about 840 days Duolingo streak as well.
That was what I was going to say.
And again, the fear, 11:58, am I going to miss my time? Yeah.
Yeah, the Duolingo, the reason the Duolingo's here in my head, I nearly missed my Spanish one last night. And the reason why when I'd heard about Duolingo, but I'd actually seen a snippet of the guy who created it on a TED Talk. It came up on my Instagram. And what he was saying was the streak is that one of the number one reasons why people stick with it. The problem is when we need to give people flexibility when the streak is broken though. So if you do, like if my streak was broken and I went, oh, now I've broken 300 days of non-stop, I could hit it so low because I'm now not doing it. We need to be able to go, it's okay. You can forgive yourself. Let's get going again. It doesn't matter. It's just a nice target. Let's build it back up.
James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about what you do when you miss that streak, and that's more important than keeping it going half the time. And it's also what you do on the days where you don't feel motivated. Even just turning up and doing 2 exercises rather than all the exercises you normally planned, you can still tick it off to say you've done it.
And that reminds me of, so when you've written down your goal, you can also beside that is options you have on that day. So again, lower intensity, or I'm just going to go for a walk and not a run, or I'm just going to, as you say, learn patterns. I'm not going to lift a heavy weight today. I'm not really in the mood for it. I had a cold last week and I don't feel really up to it. Oh, but the program says it, so I feel like I am obliged to do it. It's like going, actually, hang on a second. You have a reasoning process of, no, this could be a light session, so you don't miss it out. You still do something, but at a lower intensity, or that's going to get you towards that goal we said. So it might be something skill-based or something less intense on your body. So having those nearly like, safety nets around your emotions, because emotions are the things that are driving us towards commitment.
Yeah.
And we get hijacked by them. And at the time when your motivation is high, you cannot believe that you would not feel motivated in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
but then it's gone, isn't it? And that's like the willpower instinct in books like The One Thing, which I said on.
Yeah.
These are all those things. Is willpower is there, and then it's just suddenly not there. And how you manage that is often through emotions, because obviously negative emotions will usually make you think of doing things that solve that. So stress relief, drinking alcohol, eating food that's maybe not good for you, shopping, doing these unhealthy behaviors that reduce your stress, when actually if you just did the exercise or you just did a version of that, that would hopefully keep you on that streak and you keep going. So it's the flexibility around that.
Makes sense. And then we've mentioned a few books there, and I think you're single-handedly responsible for my Audible addiction, and mainly on self-help development type books. So we've mentioned, the One Thing, Willpower Instinct, Atomic Habits, Mindset. They're fantastic books that you recommended. If there was one book that you would recommend for someone who's just getting started, who might struggle with consistency and motivation, do you have one book that you think they should potentially read?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a shame you could ask me in an hour and I could change my mind. But I think with this, there's a couple of things I would say. So a really good book, just to be different to what you mentioned already, is called Grit.
Okay.
It's by Angela Duckworth. She's a Stanford University psychologist. And one of her favorite quotes, to go back to what we said earlier on in the beginning, when you were saying like 70% of people do their exercise at the beginning and then 20% near the end.
Yep.
Her quote is, enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare. And it's in my clinic above. It's the only quote I have, because everyone comes in going, right, I'm really enthusiastic, I'll do whatever you want me to do, you tell me and I'll do it. Everyone's motivation is high at that point, because usually pain or something is stopping them. They can't sleep or whatever. So so that book just goes into the details of that, which is really useful. But maybe if I was to say which book would I do straight away, The Willpower Instinct, without doubt, I keep coming back to it. It doesn't matter if you're healthy or not. It was off the back of the chimp paradox, which again is a great way of looking at a metaphor for your mindset and why we get hijacked by our emotions. But I think the willpower instinct is a really nice way of looking at the way our brain works and how we can then put really simple strategies in, things like a 10-minute rule, and how you distract your emotional brain to be able to get that consistency. So that would definitely be my one. It still is the one I recommend.
Perfect, thank you. And then I understand you've got a podcast coming out.
The podcast is called Therapeutic Conversations Unravels, or Teacup, so TCUP. And the reason for that is I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of conversations we have, because every single conversation I'm having with you now will be different to maybe how I have it with somebody else. But all these conversations are organic, and you can have similar principles, but they will change and they'll be flexible. And I wanted to, instead of just asking about how you treat knee pain or how you treat shoulder problems, they're not as simple as that. And it's the questions you ask and how you unravel people's lives.
Yep.
And how they get to tell you their story. So I want to know all these stories from therapists, business owners, teachers, so that we can have these conversations. Because, like, my family have listened to it because I've made them. But the feedback was I could actually listen to that, whether you're a therapist or not. So if your patients or people or just the general public are interested in conversations, it happens in business. Whether you run a cleaning business, you have to communicate, and the better you communicate, the more business you're going to get, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you talked about it, and you talk about the power of communication and how we tend to communicate better with people that are a bit more like us. Yeah. And I suppose actually for anyone who is watching this, who is wanting to get into strength training and working with a trainer, actually learning some techniques around communication and how to get the best out of that might be useful for them, because actually you don't have to go with the first person you try, you might have to try someone else.
I think, if you're selecting somebody, that connection is important. So that anytime, like I said to you in the talk, it was explore people first, find out about them, get them to tell you the story, and then build connection is quick. Now, a 70-year-old might come in, I'm 44, so we're a different age group. But just because we're a different age group, that doesn't mean that we haven't got similarities. So I'm continuously, not only just about asking questions about their body or what the problem is, I'm interested in how that's affecting their life, how many children they have, grandchildren they have, where they go on holidays. Because when people start talking about themselves, you can then start to have that similarity. Oh, well, that's the same with me. Or actually, I know somebody from there. Do you know, like I always call it the Irish principle, which is Irish people, when they meet each other abroad, we're always like trying to be related within seconds. You know what I mean? It's one of those things we do. And I think I'm trying to do that with patients. I'm trying to build that connection, because if you find somebody like that, you'll stick with them. And then that's the consistency again. Like what we said at the beginning, so you keep that consistency going, you're going to get those changes. And then you're going to get to that goal that you set out. And maybe that goal then becomes another goal and we move on. But you've learned so much about yourself in that process that you're more likely to take on a bigger challenge perhaps.
Yeah.
Because strength training is very, sometimes, like you mentioned, hard work for people who've never done it before, and then starting in their 50s, 60s, 70s. It can be a little bit off-putting.
Yeah.
But there's so much benefits to it, like you mentioned.
Great. Well, I'll certainly link to that in the description of the video.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you very much.